they're obviously the two big issues that are facing East Carolina and Vidant right now are the SODCA, which is the Set Off Debt Collection Act. That's a method for us to collect debts owed to state organizations, and I think that was either canceled or not allowed, as well as the UPL, or the upper payment limits, which restricts our ability to access essential federal Medicaid funds. And a lot of this had to do, it seems to have to do, with university-owned hospitals, and there's some confusion statewide about whether East Carolina and Brody East Carolina or Brody and Vidant are one, but they're not, and we're trying to get that cleared up throughout the Senate. I believe the House has presented a bill in the budget that does help us out with that. Can you let us know maybe where the Senate is on this, and is there support to get this changed?
Well, I believe there is. I had a conversation late yesterday afternoon with the what we call the full chairs of the Appropriations Committee. There's the ones who oversee the entire budget process from the Senate side, and so I had a conversation with them, and I told them we've just got to do something to help the Brody School and Vidant to get through this. I think there, as you say, there's a big misunderstanding of the way the money flows over there between the two entities, and so we just got to change some budget language, and I think that will put us back into where we should be. Now, what our plan says is that we're going to examine where the money comes from to run state-supported medical schools. That includes the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and also the Brody School. And I think once we do that, once the staff does that study, we will find that ECU and the Brody School and Vidant have sort of been mistreated, and this will give us an opportunity to make it up in the long session, which begins in January.
Well, and I think one of the biggest, again, it goes back to the difference between the Triangle and Eastern North Carolina is that we serve such a larger proportion of the patients that go through Vidant or indigent care, higher Medicaid, and I can't remember, I listened to a speech with Dr. Herman probably in the last couple of weeks, and it was the significant difference between what Wake Med has to do and what East Carolina has to do in indigent care and Medicaid care, and the reimbursements for that are so low. So, I mean, it's critical, the millions of dollars that ECU has lost funding to support it. And the UPL really has a lot to do with trying to recruit new doctors into the area.
That's right.
That once these doctors leave, we're no longer able to collect those federal funds, so we have a hard time recruiting. And I mean, this area is already hard enough to recruit good, strong physicians too, just with just generally a rural area. So hopefully you guys can continue to push this through and not have the tax. I saw in there where they were considering putting a tax on some of it, but speak about that if you don't mind.
Well, I just think that some people in the other part of the state have lost sight of what goes on in the East. We rely upon the Brody School to give us our doctors in the East, and they probably have to take a financial cut in order to stay here, because it might be a little bit more lucrative where the population is more affluent than our population in the East. And so for them to stay here and practice medicine here where it's so desperately needed is a true sacrifice. So we've got to protect the Brody School and the arrangement they have with Vidant.
Senator Pate, it's Terry Williams here this morning. Thank you so much
Morning.
for being with us. I think, the care that the medical school gives to the different Eastern North Carolina communities is important, but also I'm not sure people realize how much research funding and the other things that they do for our community. In a recent article that Steve Ballard put out, he pointed out that they worked on the stuttering. We have the heart surgery, that has just gone through so much change and so much wonderful things for our community, and cures for cancer and diabetes. There are incidences of diseases that directly affect Eastern North Carolina that the Brody School of Medicine is just so important for, and funding for that brings about $20 million per year, into that through their research funding.
And the economic impact for
huge.
Brody and Vidant is over $2.5 billion
That's
a
right.
year for Eastern North Carolina. So yeah, I mean it's incredibly important.
And we had a bill last year that passed that was going to designate stroke centers across the state, and of course East Carolina is way up on that list as well. That would be one of the few stroke centers in the eastern part of the state where a patient would be taken if they were having a stroke. If the paramedics realized that a stroke was going on, they'd be in contact, and they would attempt to get that patient to Vidant so that they could be treated, because that's where all of the expertise and the equipment's necessary to help them recover. So I'm hoping that'll come along as well.
Well, for those tuning in, we are on the phone with Senator Lewis Pate, two-term senator covering Lenoir, Pitt, and Wayne counties, and especially for those tuning in with these big issues surrounding the Brody School of Medicine. This is definitely not, Trent, not a Greenville issue. This is an Eastern North Carolina issue,
That's right.
and what covers what happens in Greenville and what happens with this school. You know, people from all parts of Eastern North Carolina come here for care, and so please get on the phone with your senators. Lewis Pate, you've been wonderful to have on here to support this change, but we just encourage anyone listening, you know, outside of this area that he serves, to call your senator and get this support going, because this will have a huge impact on the care for Eastern North Carolina.
No doubt about that, Michael. And Senator Pate, I didn't mean to interrupt, but as Michael said, the economic impact this has, the job growth, and the fact that the Brody School of Medicine employs over 1,900 full-time faculty and staff, and the doctors that it generates for Vidant has relationships with the Eastern North Carolina Health Center. So they're all connected. You know, Vidant, the healthcare community here is such a big part of why we continue to grow and what we used to grow, certainly jobs in the area itself. So from a job growth standpoint, as Michael said, an economic development standpoint, it's so huge and critical that UPL and SACA are paid close attention to right now in this short session.
Well, you know, we are united. We're uniting ourselves in the East. There are other issues in the East that need attention as well. This is probably the most important thing right now, is to get this sorted out. But there are a lot of other things, jobs, economic growth, and that sort of thing. And I'm using this opportunity as a way of getting all of the senators from the eastern part of the state together to talking about some common goals that we share for Eastern North Carolina. But like I say, the most important thing right now, I think we all agree, is to get this problem between Vidant's and Brody School behind us.
Well, and one question I have, Senator Pate, and I made sure I didn't misinterpret. Are we looking to try to get this resolved in the short session now, or are we looking to get this put into a later deal? I mean, where's
we
the
want to stop the pain. We want to stop any more cuts to the budget right now, and so but we're probably not going to be able to make them whole back to where they were several years ago right now until we do a study and find out how their finances operate. And we if the budget passes, we have provisions in there for that study to be completed no later than the 1st of November of 2014, so that when we come back in the long session in January, we can go ahead and take the proper action to build them back up to where they were financially several years ago.
Well, another question, kind of getting away from SODCA and UPL, obviously a lot of articles in the paper and on the news about state budget discussions right now. It seems that the House and the governor's proposal are probably a little closer. Where are you guys at in trying to narrow the differences between the two, and how are we looking in the short session on this budget?
Now, you talk about the budget as a whole?
Yes, sir.
There are two outstanding issues, I think, between the House budget and the Senate budget, and one has to do with teacher pay, and the other one has to do with Medicaid restructuring. In the Senate budget, which are not in the budget so much, but there's a bill coming out that is going to say that Medicaid in North Carolina should be separated out from the Department of Health and Human Services. It's such a big item, expense-wise, that it needs 24/7 attention all the time, and so we would put a national class person as the CEO after a long search as the CEO of Medicaid, and set that program up separate from the Department of Health and Human Services. It is not going to be a managed care operation that a lot of people seem to think it is. I think the biggest role would be played by the community care of North Carolina in setting up the network for the Medicaid patients. I think the patients would get better treatment, and I believe that the program would run much better if it were to operate independently of the department.
Was there anything, as we kind of wrap this up, is there anything that you want to add for the residents of this area to hear about what is going on in the state, things that they can kind of get behind and support or make calls on?
Well, in our budget, we average an 11% pay increase for teachers, which is very significant. And I would think that after so long of being ignored, our most important people for our children, the teachers, right after the parents, need to be recognized for the hard work they're doing, and I think our budget does that. And of course, any raise is a good raise, but 11% is really a good raise. So I think we recognize the incredible job that our teachers do, and that is probably the top issue in our budget.
Senator Louis Pate spending some time with us here on Talk of the Town. And Senator Pate, before we let you go, I did have one more. It's kind of always the case. I always have one more question. But if I can just get this one in. You talked about that 11% pay raise for teachers, which I certainly think teachers need a pay raise, and kudos to you and the House as well for putting those pay increases in their budget. In terms of paying for that, what is your opinion on the best way to be able to afford that teacher pay increase moving forward?
Well, unfortunately, some decisions have to be made somewhere. I'm not happy about doing away with teacher assistants in the second grade to pay for the pay raise. I think we can make some compromises there. It is a lot of money to make up 11%, but we certainly need to pay attention to the needs of the classroom and not throw out one part when we're increasing another part. So I hope we can not be so harsh with the teacher assistants. They are incredibly good to help out in the classroom at that early age.
I think if you haven't been in the classroom, you're right, Senator Pate. My daughter is a teacher, and those teacher assistants are vitally important because our classroom sizes are so large, and they need that help constantly, especially in those younger grades.
Well, believe you me, we've been spending a lot of time talking to teachers and parents and everyone, and we certainly get the message. And my wife is a retired teacher herself, and I know the value of her teacher assistant when she was teaching.